Hey everyone. Please support what I do to help keep Greyhawk alive by subscribing to the channel. Also, please consider becoming a channel member to get early access to videos, exclusive live chats, quarterly adventure modules, and more. Thanks, and enjoy the show. The Wild Coast is one of the most fun places to adventure in Greyhawk, and that's what I want to talk about today on Greyhawk Grognard. The Wild Coast is south of the city of Greyhawk, and it has always been a source of adventurers for the entire Greyhawk campaign. So much so that even in the village of Hamlet and later Temple of Elemental Evil, the PCs that are playing it are said to come from the Wild Coast. And in fact, that's why I have my P0 module takes you from the Wild Coast to Hamlet. But it has a reputation as being this really wild place where there's a lot of lawlessness, and so adventurers can find a lot of stuff to do there. I'm going to read from my coverless and well-worn copy of the Guide to the World of Greyhawk from the Gold Box. This is set in 576, remember. Some big changes happen, so we'll get to those. The Wild Coast has no capital, several major towns, which we'll get to. A population of about 150,000, give or take. Many demi-humans, many humanoids. The western shores of the Sea of Garnat have long been called the Wild Coast, for the region has been a haven for malcontents, dissidents, demi-humans, humanoids, and the outcasts of other states. It is a fair but not particularly fertile area, rolling countryside interspersed with woodlands, fens, and scattered clusters of dwellings. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. The Wild Coast remains a free territory comprised of petty nobles, robber barons, guild-held towns, fishing and forest villages, freebooters, mercenaries, and displaced persons of all sorts. This is due to the remote and isolated position it holds, its lack of resources, and the fact that it has never been a desirable position strategically. There's a little bit of the history. It's been under the control of Ulick and Greyhawk and Selene and Hardby and all sorts of things, but at 576, it's pretty much self-ruling. The inhabitants, being of a mind otherwise, have always managed to regain their freedom. Um, there is no question that the Wild Coast is known throughout the Flanness as a place of sanctuary, albeit a highly dangerous one. Filled with adventure at the very least, its racially mixed peoples are well known as mercenaries and adventurers themselves. The area gives rise to many outstanding clerics, fighters, magic users, and thieves. Legendary natives of the Wild Coast include such persons as Mordenkainen, Robilar, and Tensor, to name but a few. That is such an evocative description of the place. It is almost lawless, but there's all these little petty nobles and villages and towns and stuff that are all independent. There's no real central authority, so it's very easy to get lost in there if you want to get lost. It's a great origin point for a lot of adventurers, so it's just a wonderful place. You can stick just about any kind of adventure in there, and it'll work. So I really love that as kind of this wide open place where just about anything can happen. So, looking at the geography of the Wild Coast, you can see it is split up into two halves. In the northern half of the Wild Coast, we have the towns of Narwell and Safeton. In the southern half, we have the towns of Fax, Badwall, and Elrid. You can see that the Pomarge is right there, along with the town of Highport. You've got Ulick to the southwest. You've got Selene, the Elvish Kingdom, which is to the west. You've got the city of Greyhawk to the northeast, and you've got the Woolly Bay on the east coast. And I love that because you've got the Wild Coast and the Woolly Bay. It's like a pun that Gary set up in the whole thing, because wild and woolly is kind of like a Wild Western kind of thing, and that's the sort of feel that I think he wanted the Wild Coast to bring up. It's also important to note that Rob Kuntz, the ODM of the Greyhawk campaign, has done a lot of work in the Wild Coast. He's got an unpublished manuscript about it, I believe, which I would love to absolutely see. But getting back to the geography, you can see that where you have this bifurcation into the two halves, this becomes significant as the campaign wears on. And so keep this map in mind as we go through some of the further history of the Wild Coast. So what happens next is that Down in the Pomarge, which is run by humanoids and orcs and so forth, a particularly capable half orc named Turashmak basically takes over the Pomarch, brings all of the humanoid tribes together, and promises to forge an empire where none has stood. Which is a lovely, evocative name there. Um, to get a grip on this quarrelsome collection of orcs, goblins, gnolls, ogres, and the like, Turash united them behind a common cause, tales of the hateful wars, which drove the tribes from the Lort Mills, those are the mountains to the west, still circulated around the council fires, so Turash needed little persuading to convince his chieftains to reclaim their birthright. By a stroke of fortune, Turash struck at the most opportune time. Great crusading armies had just left the lands of the south, taking with them some of their nation's ablest men and generals, while with others' attentions focused to the north, the newly proclaimed Orc nation found time to organize and grow. Um, in quick succession, GG's here. In quick succession, Elred, Badwall, and Fax fell to the humanoid armies, and thus the southern wild coast was overrun. Flushed with victory, the tribes turned southwest, marching through the dreaded Sus Forest and into the Principality of Ulick. Which is, a tale for another day, but basically the humanoid advance gets stopped in the southern Lort Mills by a collection of demi-humans, elves and gnomes and dwarves and so forth, and that ends the expansion of the Orcish Empire. But so what happens is by the end of the Greyhawk Wars, around 584, so 8 years after the Gold Box is published, is that the entire southern half um, of the Wild Coast is overrun by orcs and humanoids and so forth. They're part of the great empire of the Pomarch. And in reaction to this, Greyhawk, the city of Greyhawk, kind of reasserts its authority over Narwhal and Safeton, and bringing them into what's called the domain of Greyhawk, along with Hardby. So Greyhawk takes advantage of this, kind of parlays the threat from the orcs into an expansion of its own. So now we have a situation where the northern half of the Wild Coast is um, ruled by Greyhawk, and the southern half of the Wild Coast is ruled by the Pomarch. So it's no longer free, and that situation kind of remains throughout the published history of the setting up until 591, where we stand right now. So what happens with the Wild Coast is still up for debate. Um, as it said in the guide, the people of the Pomarch of the Wild Coast always seem to regain their freedom. So doubtless that could happen again, and that would make for a wonderful campaign. Of leading up an insurrection against the orcs in the south, and regaining the freedom of Fax and Badwall and Elred, or even overthrowing the Lord Mayor of Greyhawk as the ruler of Narwhal and Safeton and all the villages up there. So there's a lot of potential that comes out of the Greyhawk Wars when you come to the Pomarch. So it's very good in that respect. Now, it's also the case that a lot of published modules have been placed there. Obviously, the slave lords and slavers and so forth; those all take place in Highport and the Pomarge. Some of them start in the Wild Coast and move down there. So there's a lot of activity there. There's a bunch of things from Dungeon Magazine have been published in the Wild Coast as well. So there's no lack of materials for it. There's been a lot of expansion in terms of the number of cities and villages and towns and so forth that are in there, but most of that is fan created stuff, which is not bad in and of itself. But be aware that according to the original sources, there were the 5 towns, and a whole bunch of little villages and so forth. But you do what you want. You do what you want and need to do in your own campaign. So there we are for the Wild Coast, a wonderful source of adventurers and a wonderful place to adventure. Plenty of potential, sort of pivotal history in the last few years in the campaign setting itself. So it's definitely a place to check out if you have your party anywhere near the area. The city of Greyhawk is nearby, like I said. The Palm March is nearby, so plenty of places to go and adventure. So do check it out. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever done a lot of campaigning in the Wild Coast itself? Please do let me know. Let me know how it went and what you used and where you went and so forth. Love to hear it. And hope you're all having a wonderful day. And I will talk to you all later.
Thanks for watching today's video. Please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Below you'll find links to my Patreon, which helps make these videos possible. You'll also find the web store where you can buy my books, and my blog where you'll find all sorts of free downloads and other articles. Thanks, and have a great day.